Welcome to everyone. This is the second Insights, Inspiration and Learning webinar. The first one we took a close look at India and had nearly 5,000 viewers. So I hope that we have the same level of interest in Bangladesh's remarkable story. We're going to look at the role of the digital infrastructure in situations like COVID and learn from Bangladesh's experience. And to do that, we have a stellar panel. Ania Chowdhury, policy advisor to the Aspire to Innovate, the A2I program. Maria May, senior program officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who spent many years in Bangladesh. Kamal Kadir, who I think needs no introduction at all worldwide, as the CEO of bKash. Mezabul Haq, who is a general manager at Bangladesh Bank for payment systems. And I hope that very soon, Rubana is here. Rubana Haq, who is the president of the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, which of course is an immensely important group in the context of the Bangladesh economy. So that is your panel, and I just want to set a little bit of context and highlight some of Bangladesh's achievements. And given that Rubana Appa is with us, perhaps we'll start with the extraordinary drive to pull 4.1 million ready-made garment workers from 63 different factories onto the MFS platforms, the mobile financial services platforms. That's now 82% of total garment factory workers on those platforms. And that allowed the factory owners and so on to make payments of close to $500 million. So an extraordinary turbocharging of the reach of digital financial services. Simultaneously, starting a little bit earlier, the social safety net program in Bangladesh already covers 6.4 million people. Pension of about 4 million, widow's allowance of about 1.5, and disability benefits of another 1 million. And then, of course, we have COVID, and that, led by Ania Chowdhury and many others, launched on May the 14th, 2020. We had this big cash assistance program reaching, or aiming to reach, 500 million poor families, and paying them 2,500 taka, which is about $30, primarily through mobile financial services. The intent is that's an intended disbursement of about $142 million. And that's really been possible because of the work to roll out the electronic KYC earlier this year, and also the union digital centers, of which there are about 4,500 around the country. And they are the cornerstone of the government of Bangladesh's efforts to drive the digital Bangladesh vision. So that's the background, a lot of activity, a lot of great infrastructure in place. And of course, we'll talk in due course about the extraordinary agent network that bKash has put in place that facilitates so much of this. But I want to start with the establishment of that digital infrastructure and the role it's been playing, and start with Anir Bhai. A2I pioneered the process of digitization of public services in Bangladesh. How would you rate the adoption and comfort of poor people using digital financial services. We know many people are perhaps semi-literate in Bangladesh. Do you feel that the digital divide is indeed closing, or are there still significant challenges and miles to go?
Thank you, Graham. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for the question. Let me give you a little bit of history. I won't take too much time. I know that time's limited. So when the Honorable Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, announced the concept of Digital Bangladesh towards the end of 2008, that was part of the election manifesto at that time that helped the government win a landslide victory at that time, because a lot of first-time voters were taken by this idea of becoming a digital country by 2021, which is the 50th anniversary of the country's birth. So that actually took the imagination of a lot of first-time voters. And that's when the journey really started. So the first year was difficult because we didn't have infrastructure. We didn't have the necessary processes in the different offices. The mindset was very analog, but that changed quickly. So starting from 2010, which is when we saw the launching of the 4,500 Union Digital Center and subsequently another 700 in the urban, peri-urban areas. So we're seeing the way we actually calculate digital progress is by looking at the level of inefficiency that we have reduced. And the simple metric that we use to look at the inefficiency is how much time, cost, and the number of visits citizens actually spend to get a government service. And the last 10, 11 years, we have actually seen that we have saved citizens in terms of time about 2 billion work days, in terms of cost, about $8 billion. And in terms of visits, about 1 billion visits have been eliminated. So that's a fairly remarkable number. And this is, I'm talking about end of last year. We have not done an update of that calculation. So digitization really has progressed significantly in Bangladesh. About 700 services are online in different forms, either web or through mobile phones. Although out of 2,800 plus services. So we have done 11 years of work, but we have miles to go. You talked about digital divide. Digital divide, in a sense, is not really discussed much in Bangladesh. I mean, if you look at articles, media articles, you won't see the digital divide discussed that much as in many other emerging nations, emerging economies. And that's because of the bottom-up approach that we have taken. So just because we actually looked at the unions, which is the lowest tier of local government, each union is about 30,000 or so people. And then we came to the urban area. So we did not look at the trickle down. We actually said, okay, let's try to go to the bottom, because that's where the need is the highest. That's where the divide is the highest. Call it education divide, economic divide, social divide. That's where the divide is the highest. So we did not want to introduce a new divide called digital divide. So as far as the digital divide is concerned, I think we have done quite well. However, having said that, in the digital financial services, the divide has increased. If you look at the numbers, the men's access to financial services increased from mid 30%, 35% to about 65% financial inclusion. And in the same time, women's have increased from 26% to 35%. So the gap between men and women actually has significantly widened. And even during COVID, we've realized that there are pockets where people don't have access to, actually quite large pockets, I would say, don't have access to reliable internet, high-speed internet. We were trying to take a lot of our services, educational services, over TV and internet, and we've seen that only a fraction of our students can actually access these services. That means the digital divide is still very real, even though we started bottom up and we've made significant progress, but we're seeing during times of crisis that we need to do a lot more work in terms of infrastructure, in terms of cost of accessing the infrastructure, and in terms of making that infrastructure reliable for not only digital financial services, but for any digital services. Maybe I'll explain a bit more in the subsequent round. Thank you very much, Graham.
Great. I mean, that's really inspiring and fascinating. Thank you so much. Mezbul Bhai, I'd like to ask you a little bit about onboarding and verification. Clearly, something that's of immense importance to Bangladesh Bank. What have you done to sort of simplify on customer onboarding while maintaining, your needs for KYC and at the same time optimizing customer protection?
Yes, thank you, Graham, for inviting me. Let me put it in two different parts. Actually, the first stimulus package that was shared by the government after COVID outbreak was for the stimulus package for the government workers to pay their salary. And at that point of time, we had discussion with the BGMEA and other garments owners that most probably there is the existing garment workers account were about 1.9 million account were there with the MFS service providers. But then we had an estimate that there should be more than 4 million, requirement of 4 million accounts to pay the salary. And at that point of time, we actually discussed the matter with all the MFS providers. And then we came out with the solutions that, okay, we'll invite all the workers to open account in the traditional way. They can use the eKYC method, or they can use the visit the agent point and open their account. And then we also discuss with the owners that, okay, if they can provide us the NID and the birth registration certificate, then we can, and if they guarantee that these are the people who are working for their industry, and then we'll open the account on the basis of those NID and birth registration certificate by verifying with the Election Commission database. And that was the first decision we made, and that's how we made it happen. And within very few days, 2.3 million accounts were opened. And though all of those, most of them were based on the NID, and it was verified MFS accounts. So that was one part that we have made. And then the second challenge came to us that government wants to distribute 2,500 taka to the poorest people who lost their profession during this COVID time. And at that point of time, the whole local administrations were involved to prepare a list that who are the people who will be the beneficiary of this fund. And then we decided, okay, if since the local administration is creating this list, and if they can give us the NID and one of their or birth certificate, then the government decided to disburse the whole amount to 4 designated MFS. And then we distributed the total list to these MFS service providers. And then they verified, first they identified who are the existing account holders. And then they identified the people who are not having any kind of MFS account. And then with the list and the provided NID and with verification of the Election Commission database, we have actually created the account, and a link was sent to the mobile number, and after activating that link, they can draw the money. And that is how we have completed. But again, there are some people who are not having any MFS account, and even not having any mobile phone. So for them, we decided to open the 10 taka no frill account with the agent bank or any traditional bank, and they can draw the money in those accounts. Actually, the whole process was driven by the electronic fund transfer network, and that's how we have distributed the money that has been provided by the government.
So the NID, the national identity, was key to all of this.
Yeah.
And that has met your needs for KYC and ensuring that you meet all the requirements of PATF and so on.
Yeah.
Kamal Bhai, then we heard Mezamul Bhai talk a great deal about MFS, the mobile financial system. It rides on partnerships with telcos, and for some years there was some degree of tension between the two because the telcos were not able to participate as much in the development as they might have, shall we say. How do telco partners now view MFS compared to when you started out, and what steps or initiatives would make that partnership even stronger from your perspective?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for inviting me, first of all. Well, I mean, today, MFS industry is increasingly giving very mature industry in the country, where I mean, if I just to complement with what, as a practitioner, what GM PhD was mentioning, I would say that what was in 2011 was a guidelines from central bank that became a regulation in 2018. So there has been continuous effort by the regulator in maturing the process. FIU also has issued clear guidelines, the roles of different parties in providing the service. So what I would say that to address your question, before I address your question, is that the roles of each and every function, namely, what would be the MNO be doing? What will the election commission be doing by providing the access to NIT? What would be the role of the distributor? What would be the role of the agent? Okay. These things are quite well matured today and quite well defined. Okay. So that definitely makes it much more, the function of the industry is far more robust. Now, coming back to your point, see, one of the things that we heard back in 2009-10, that will there be a possibility of a separate distribution channel to distribute the digital money? Well, it seems distribution can be built. Okay, one thing we often fail to see, the distributors are independent business people. Okay, so you take a specific product to them and encourage them to distribute the product with financial incentive behind it. So what was distributed 200 years ago as Matchbox, that got distributed 100 years ago as Coca-Cola, and that got distributed as airtime in the early part of the century, of this century. And then mobile money came from 2007 as a distribution element. So what seemed like a impossible thing, and only MNOs has it, but later what we saw, no, it's actually quite well distributed. And today, if you look at the agent banking that central bank is promoting, there too, they are using a different channel. So I think that's a debate that has at least Bangladesh has demonstrated very clearly that when you set the rules and regulation and bring discipline in the market and demonstrate whose role should be what, innovation could happen. And there the natural fit of a regulator, that financial service will be regulated by a financial regulator, can be, that integrity can be maintained as something which in my eyes was a compromise in Africa. But in the case of Bangladesh, that compromise didn't take place. So I would say, given that today there's a tremendous cooperation is going on between MNOs and other technology partners. And if I say in the context of today's conversation, this entire thing happened because a lot of relevant forces came together. Okay, Bangladesh has, and Ani Chaudhary just mentioned the government's vision about digital Bangladesh. The infrastructure of ID that we have today in Bangladesh, it's not very common among the developing countries of this kind of quality infrastructure of national ID card. 110 million people in Bangladesh has national ID card today. Okay, so that resource was already there in government's disposal. Okay, and then the 10 years old, if I look at ourselves, our license was given in 2010, April 2010. So 10 years old industry, along with Rocket and others. 10 years old industry has also created an infrastructure across the country where opening an account is not a challenge anymore. Okay, the recent COVID crisis and when BGMA and government wanted to open account, we could see that there are 60,000 digital KYC center where you can go and open an account. There are individual people who has smartphone. They can also open the account for themselves or for their family member or friends. So and of course the NID is now digitally verified live from the the system of the election commission, which holds the NID data. So combination of all this factor, and then came the regulator and looked at the practical element. And I must also add the industry players. The BGMES saw the values over here. They also encouraged us to put all the resources available. Okay, and then came the regulator and the ministry looked at the practical element that if we provide a service like that, how the cost will be distributed, who will be paying what. So when the regulator came in and provided a clear guidance, who will be paying what value, what subsidy will be paid by the MNOs, MFS operator, how the banks will be participating, how the factories will be participating, how the customers will be participating, it became quite effective. So it's a combination of all the different players coming together. And of course, MNO played a very important role there because it's an infrastructure they provide that we are all depending on. But it's an interesting phenomenon that Graham, we need to look at, that across the world. I mean, since the Industrial Revolution, everything that has happened is depending on the power supply. Okay, so today too we are very much depending on the infrastructure of the digital network provider. And one good thing happened in 2018 that central bank was working, BTRC was working on the network fee of how the network fee would be seen by the MFS operator and MNOs. So I recall the Prime Minister's IT advisor also got involved, and it came up with a clear solution today. So today, when somebody is using MFS, okay, who will be paying what? How much you pay for the network? How much you pay to the is all very much defined among the operators. So MNO knows how much they will be making from it. MFS knows what is their responsibility towards the MNOs. So I think it's a sign of the industry maturing, and that's what I was saying. It got captured in the simple the evolution that you see, that what was in 2010 a license and a guidelines. Today it's a regulation and many other supporting regulation along with it, including BA5 regulation to support.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Kamalbai. And I mean, as you say, it's a testament to a combination of the regulator and the players. And I always think the entrepreneurial spirit of the Bangladeshis that these things have come to fruition in a way that might not have otherwise happened, perhaps. So, Rubanap, I hope you can hear us. We can only see you on a blank screen at the moment, but I wanted to talk briefly about that big change. Ah, there you are. And creating 2.5 million formal financial accounts on MFS platforms in less than 30 days. I mean, that is an extraordinary achievement. What sort of preparations did you put in place to get ready for that? And how did you manage to do it while protecting customer privacy and ensuring that the right amount got to the right account at the right time? I think you have to unmute yourself, Appa.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's been just too many, there've been so many Zooms lately that it's unbelievable. But anyway, no, thank you for asking me to be a part of the panel. What happened with the COVID response and the way the government wanted us to have the payments all disbursed through MFS was indeed a challenge, because the organization that I represent is an owners organization. And it's not easy to immediately, turn things around. And converting everyone to MFS, and it was kind of a dent in the ego, because what the government did was they said it'll go straight to the workers. So it meant that the banks would directly disburse it to the workers. It would come to our account, but we would have nothing to do with it. So that was the first mindset that I had to kind of deal with when I spoke to my colleagues in the industry and said, look, it's still your loan, and government is giving it this way because they want to ensure that it's properly dispersed. So everybody felt a little slighted, a little upset with the whole thing. But tell you what, we just did not budge. And I also quietly told Bangladesh Bank and Ministry of Finance that that we should have this pressure on, so that we could turn them all into digital banking. And what is digital transaction, of course. But at the end, what happened was everything went seamlessly, because there was great service providers. Like Bikash was there, Nagod was there, Dutch Bangla's Rocket was there. These people just, were phenomenal. So it was when we started doing it in the preparatory stage, I must say the service providers were very willing, and they literally helped us with any and every request that we made. So I spent I literally spoke a lot to Kamal and of course everyone else, and they were very, very supportive. So it became easy for us to handle the whole thing, because exceptions were made, rules were bent, everything for a cause. Certainly not Machiavellian, but we did what we wanted to do, and that is to make sure that these workers came under MFS. So the thing that we were looking at was data, because very often we say that we have 4.1 million workers, and we really don't know whether it's all that accurate or not. So from BGMEA's database, instead of saying we have 4,000 plus factories, we discovered that we literally documented that there were only 2,274 active factories. Rest were subcontractors. So this was valuable information for me. So COVID also gave me a chance to clean up the database. And then we also saw that we had 2.54 million workers. So it was just database, very clear. And when Bangladesh Bank issued the circular of loan, it was another step forward to transparency, because literally from the association, we had to certify every application that was received by the association. So unless we certified on that form, the loan wouldn't get dispersed. So every loan application has my signature. So we took responsibility for so many members and factories, and we just carried on, because I knew mistakes could happen. I knew that things could go wrong, but touch wood, I don't know what it was. It was just sheer luck, I guess. Nothing went wrong. And, this is because, at the beginning, before the loan was disbursed, when we were talking to the government, when we were negotiating, we had already done a survey of all our member factories, and we took 3 months average salary of theirs just as a reference point. So we had all that ready. So when Honorable Prime Minister announced on the 25th of March, we were ready with exact figures, because we had already gathered all the info. So what it has done is we've also cleaned up our database, and it's opened another big opportunity of other donors directly giving their funds to these workers. Like EU has actually, they are planning to give us a fund, the government, of course, but the government will be using our database to access that to compensate workers. So I think it's given us a huge opening. My only sadness is that this is binding only for the period of the stimulus. So for April, May, and June. And then we go our own ways, and we disburse bonuses the way we used to, we disburse our salaries the way we used to. So it becomes a little, it's kind of like a temporary measure, which I would like it to actually crystallize, and it should be done forever. So maybe we need to again sit with the government and see if there can be benefits to this long-term changes, and so that we don't revert to our usual practices. So that's what we should actually be looking at.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you brought an underserved segment into the digital world, and to let them loose back into analog seems a retrograde step. But that sounds fantastic, and it's always wonderful to hear some of the collaborations that have been forged out of the crisis that is this pandemic, and here is a really very exciting example. So Maria, finally, thank you so much for waiting. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have supported Bangladesh's digital journey over the years. I think that support has been invaluable. How do you think people in Bangladesh, and particularly vulnerable communities, are they really ready for the digital world that we're all driving them to? And obviously, Anirbai referred to this as well, there is always the consideration of the gender dynamics in Bangladesh and the gender gap in access.
Thank you, Graham. It's a real honor to be here on the panel with such distinguished speakers. Yeah, I think if we were going to write kind of like what is the narrative of digital financial services in Bangladesh, like I actually think that the demand has been there since the services began, and everyone else has been trying to keep pace with people using their, their mobile financial services, often just for remittances, but something that's very important to their life and their money. And so I think the question about whether or not they're ready is in some sense about whether or not we're ready to provide what's needed to them. And I say this because increasingly, when we zoom in on the populations that you mentioned who have lower literacy, lower digital familiarity, maybe more rural, poor, when we zoom in and do surveys with them, we actually see extremely high levels of acceptance of digital financial services. So just to give a few examples, pre-COVID, last year, Center for Global Development, Dhaka University did a beneficiary survey with mothers receiving the primary education stipend in Bangladesh. And they found that over 80% of mothers preferred receiving their payments over mobile money compared to the old cash methodology. Now, when you go into COVID, right, and again, like suddenly cash poses all sorts of challenges in terms of bringing people together into large groups. A2I, together with Harvard and Florida International University, did a study with the widows, the people receiving the old age allowance. Again, very vulnerable populations who traditionally don't own phones, have very low levels of literacy relative to other members of the population. We found that 71% of beneficiaries would prefer to receive the payment over mobile financial services. And perhaps the most interesting statistic is when you looked at the beneficiaries who don't have their own phone, right? So they would rely on a family member or a neighbor. It's still about 67% of beneficiaries, right? Which I think is pretty shocking. Again, when we think about the questions that we often ask about, mobile versus others. BRAC did a survey of ultra poor households that they worked with. When they said, do you have a phone that you could receive mobile money on? Only 37% said yes. When they said, do you have someone who you would trust to receive this money for you digitally? That number is almost 90%. Right? So these are huge achievements. Together with the South Asia Network of Economic Modeling, SANAM, and Microfinance Opportunity, there's a weekly survey of garment factory workers. And again, it's actually pretty shocking to me how, again, knowing that there's huge challenges, there's very high levels of acceptance and satisfaction from workers on the digital payments. And so to me, this just really demonstrates that, you know, people understand what digital payments are. They trust that. There's been incredible work by the financial service providers and the regulators to make that work. I think the big challenge for Bangladesh now is moving to the sustained trust and storing value, you know, really thinking about fraud, consumer protection, building out the digital ecosystem. Obviously, these take time, and there's an evolution, but huge steps in the right direction. On women specifically, there is a digital divide, and we certainly have to keep that in mind. But I think it's also really important that we don't underestimate the value of digital financial services to women and the bright spots that we see from Bangladesh and other places. And again, I would point to the work that BRAC has done in some of the hardest to reach communities in the country around microfinance and other things quite successfully. We work with a group called Business for Social Responsibility that's partnered with a lot of the factory owners who belong to BGMEA. And when we do research on what this has done to their lives, it's more control over their salary. It's, you know, more ability to manage their spending across the month. Those who have received training and support have very high levels of usage of different types of transactions. And so there's really a lot of opportunity, I think, particularly in this moment, to think about how we support women to adopt digital financial services in a way that's transformative to them and their families. And I can come back to this later. We do a lot of work. We have what we call the D3 framework, so digitize, direct, and design for women. And on the design piece, I think there's a lot of work that we could do with financial service providers around, like, you know, what does the experience look like for women? Like, what is a great agent experience for a woman? Is it sharing my phone number at a very crowded stall with, you know, lots of men listening, or is it something else? And so, you know, those are places where we could really zoom in and I think make a big difference to women's comfort level. On that last note, I also think, like, this is where agent banking gets really exciting to me because it doesn't require a phone. By nature, it's a little bit more private. And so with the infrastructure that's now been built out in the Union Digital Centers and beyond that, there's a real opportunity to think about how to use that for women. Just want to do a quick shout out to some great research that Google Next Billion Users has done. The Bangladesh portion was led by Nova Ahmed. Really fantastic, very practical report on the challenges women face online and achieving digital gender equity. Talks a lot about privacy, security, and again, what women are really looking for when they look at these services. Thank you.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to accessing that. That's very helpful. Anybody? I'm going to come back to you as we talk about the insights from the G2P program. That this G2P program was inaugurated in June 2018. And as I said earlier, about 6.5 million beneficiaries receive money through this system. And Maria just talked about the primary education allowance, the PASP, for 13 million children as well, being transferred to mobile banking accounts of 10 million mothers. Under your leadership, A2I was essentially the sharp end of this largest cash assistance program ever using MFS channels. How did you manage the complex issues of beneficiary selection, enrollment, disbursement, and fraud management that plague all of these programs?
Thanks, Graham. So as we started digitizing services in 2009 onward and accelerated in 2010-11, we realized a couple of years later that we were doing only half the job. We were digitizing services. That means we're creating a digital channel for access of the service so people could apply by going to the digital centers, the rural areas, or going online, people who had access, or going to the web, going to the mobile financials, mobile services. But we realized that we're not digitizing payments for the services. So it's basically the P2G, not the G2P. So that was what struck us first, that we were only doing half the work. And then when we started working on that, that's when Gates Foundation came in with support, both financial and also design. And we started doing some studies in 16 timeframe. And we realized that the same infrastructure, if you can build it right, can support both G2P and P2G. Although we started with the P2G lens, I think G2P became a more urgent issue because there was so much leakage in the system. I mean, we never really published the amount of leakage that we found, but there was substantial at that time that we studied in 2016. And again, we used the lens of TCV. So what is the time, cost, and the number of visits to get the benefit, the cash benefit? You go stand in line, maybe go multiple times, sun and rain, widows, elderly. I mean, just think about the long lines in front of wherever the cash is being distributed, whether it's a bank or whether it's union council, whatever it is. So we, through the design process, we came up with this idea called the choice architecture, where the beneficiary will decide where they will get the benefit. So they will decide whether it's an MFS, whether it's an agent bank, whether it's a postal cash card at that time we looked at, then now it's Nogod. So they will decide what transport mechanism and what provider they actually find most comfortable, most convenient. So that became the basis of this choice architecture. So one thing that Maria mentioned, I think this is very telling, is that I don't think at that time when we designed this, we looked at women's choices particularly, and that's where we are at now. So what the women choices are? So we had this wages summit where Rubana Appa was there, Maria was there in November of last year, 2019. And it seemed like the way you design things from the beneficiary standpoint, the devil is always in the details. So we did a general purpose design. So that was successful, choice architecture. But then now we have to think about the choice for women. What do they really need? And then beyond G2P, we're also thinking about complex digital products. I will talk about them later, but that's where we have to head now. But beneficiary selection. So that's another interesting area. So beneficiary selection happened at one time in an analog way. So everybody had their own list of beneficiaries in paper databases. Or even if they have digital databases, they never talk to each other. So we would have beneficiaries listed in, let's say, the Department of Social Services, Ministry of Women Affairs, Disaster Management, the Liberation War Affairs. So you'd have different beneficiary listed, and they were all silos. There was no way to tell whether somebody's double dipping intentionally or unintentionally, whether there was any gaps in the system. So when we started bringing them together, a centralized MIS or decentralized MIS of beneficiary listing, but connected together so that they could talk to each other. So there was interoperability that was established. That was actually another back-end design decision that we made that paid huge benefits. Because now you can do all sorts of intelligent analysis of who is being left out, who is actually being benefited twice, that should not be. So all those analyses is possible. So beneficiary selection became more mature. But what we realized during the time of COVID, the new poor that don't exist in any of these databases. So the 5 million or so households that we had to support, how do you find them? Again, that became an analog process. So we had a lot of field officials in the union councils, union parishads, at the Upazila level, at the district level. So they made lists. But again, these were all digital lists. So in analog way, but digital lists were produced, and we can do analysis on these digital lists, creation of bulk accounts. You can actually mix and match. You can look at gaps. But the wave of the future is to look at telco data to do much more proactive poverty ranking. So we're now looking at universities, Yale and Berkeley, to explore, and again, the confidentiality issues, the privacy issues, we're working through all of that with the telcos, and they've been very forthcoming, and also the BTRC, the telco regulator, to look at the right amount of information of top up, of even phone calls, SMS, and there is a correlation. It's a complex one. It's not a direct correlation, but it's a complex correlation of how you make calls and send SMS and do top-ups of the size, the packet size, and all of that, depending on your poverty level. So if you earn 15,000 taka a month versus if you earn 8,000 taka a month because you've just become relatively poorer because of COVID, your call patterns, your telco pattern actually changes. So we're now looking at whether that gives us some sort of indication of beneficiary selection. As we get into flood situations, as we get into other crisis situations, I think this will greatly help us. In terms of fraud detection, this is still work in progress, I would say. There is analog and digital that will have to be at play, but then also looking at multiple databases together. So bringing a lot of data together and bringing data from multiple sources, public and private, will actually allow us to do much more intelligent fraud detection. During COVID, we set up a hotline called 333. I mean, that was used for accessing information about public services. This became a lifeline for government, for citizens, for health service. So that became a telemedicine service, but we also repurposed it later on to actually have people who were falling into the, people falling through the cracks, they would be able to call into 333. So that happened during beneficiary selections. A lot of people, tens of thousands of people actually were found by self-selecting. So there was a self-selection process. They would call into 333 and say, I need support. And they were included in the database. So that also became a fairly interesting way of doing beneficiary self-selection. And then we obviously have to go through a due diligence process. Now the 333 in future will also be repurposed again to become a grievance redressal mechanism for the beneficiary. So we're now looking at combination of many different types of technologies, approaches, public and private. And I would say collaboration was extremely key. A lot of the panelists talked about collaboration. Without the right collaboration within government, within the public agencies, and with the private sector, telcos, banks, MFS providers, in an unprecedented way, everybody came forward with such open arms and made decisions so quickly. I mean, I've never seen Bangladesh Bank make decisions so quickly. BTRC make decisions over WhatsApp. I mean, it's been an incredible journey for the last 4 months. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Now, I mean, these databases are always the biggest headache when it comes to emergency cash transfers and so on. So as you say, thinking smart and using technology to start identifying correct beneficiaries makes a huge difference. Kamal Bhai, bKash has been a major partner in enabling G2P payments in Bangladesh, starting with the education stipend and cash assistant programs now. It's complicated to make, such enormous mass payouts a success. How did you balance priorities like ensuring network and tech support, agent support, customer onboarding, and managing liquidity throughout the pandemic, which was driving lockdown and very difficult operating circumstances for you?
Well, Graham, that's what we do for a living. So basically, I think our 10 years of exercise, I mean, if we look at this way, that a soldier's job is to prepare for the war, and you don't know when the war will come. So I think our preparation paid off. The investment we made that allowed us to handle this kind of demand when it was required to deliver. For example, the eKYC infrastructure. It's a large investment, but I'm glad we made that investment last year. I think the central bank declaring us as essential service through their recommendation, government declaring us, that made it possible for us to maintain liquidity at 240,000 agent points across the country. Okay. Because there was a time when banks were open only for 2 hours a day. So when you take a massive amount of cash within the 2 hours and then distribute that across the channel without having that status that we can travel across, our motorcycle can travel, it was not easy. And I would say the other thing is the whole mechanism is a very business incentive. It's an incentive based business structure. Okay, so that allows the agent to keep the shop open even if the day they're in crisis, because he is thinking, okay, if I can take the social protection, social distancing protection and provide the service, then I can make certain income that can be a good support for my family. Same with the distributor. So basically that element, okay, and it helped. And one thing I must say that the collective investment, the government and the infrastructure providing companies provided, the investment they made in last 20 years building the mobile infrastructure, that also I have not seen. There are pockets of blank spot we found, but I have not seen infrastructure of internet impacting in a severe way during the last 4 months. So combination of all these, okay, and I would say that we have today around 2,100 full-time workers. So they too also know it's a machine. They know how to operate. We get around when we get around 25,000 customer service call in a natural day, regular day. During the COVID crisis time, we got around 35,000 calls every day. Okay, so those are very stretched period. And I mean, I'm just sharing because in the middle of that, you find that one person has COVID positive, and you immediately evacuate the entire place and do the sanitization process. So these are some of the challenges the country has learned to deal with. But I would say that regulator remain engaged. That's why those support that now you can have declare yourself as you are declared as essential service. MNOs providing good network, us having a machine that is designed to do this thing. Banks opening gradually from 2 hours to full hours. I think that helped. And I think Bangladesh is Bangladesh more than many of us. Okay, I think the resilient quality of the country, and I think in a crisis like that, as Anil was mentioning, that people make decision on WhatsApp. Okay, we end up having meetings with the regulators and with the service provider over Zoom, quite common way, and people also learn to adopt that. So combination of all this thing, I would say that the critical credit I'm going to give is that the business structure having incentive-based model, okay, has encouraged agents to go back and distributor to work. And we have been working, there are times we work 16, 17 hours a day, okay. And we're also not designed to function this way. But it's with the rest of the country, we also adopted.
Yeah. Yes, the resilience of Bangladesh, that is for sure one of its many, many qualities. Rubanapa, I know that you have to go, so I'm going to ask this question, and if you wish to chip in with any other thoughts before you leave, please do. But we talked about how you sort of hoped digital approach would continue afterwards. What can be done to further accelerate that continuation of the use of digital financial services for the workers and indeed for the entire industry? You'll need to unmute yourself, Alpa.
Sorry, we had already applied. We actually did a pilot on e-wallet, a digital e-wallet for the industry, and it was what we thought was, it would become, the cell phone would actually become their wallet. it would become their lifestyle, so that they could, schedule their television programs, they could look at things, and that they would be able to purchase everything with it. So we wanted an interactive digital platform, and we wanted it vendor neutral as well, so that the competition would give our workers the best possible opportunity to get maximum benefits out of their salary. So, it would mean that Bikash and everyone else would have to align with that national platform. And our ICT ministry was very much on board with it. It's just that I think it's still stuck, and Mesbah Bhai is right here. So I will voice it even more, that, it's stuck at Bangladesh Bank. And I'm hoping that, this was a time when we could have actually made full use of it, and we could have had the industry continue with it. So I would hope that all inclusive digital platform would actually become a reality for Bangladesh, because it's just not about transactions. It's just that we want our workers to be completely digital. And I think, there are lots of things that can be done with the workers, because it's, if you actually include all the associations, then it is probably 4.1 million. Even if it's not, it's close to 3.7. So these 3.7 million or 4.1 million workers is a huge database. And, it's huge data. And if we can somehow introduce a standardized system, then, it's a massive job done. And for us also, one of the main hassles remains still security. Like, this is Eid time now, and we're having to tell all our members that, please, all your cash needs to be escorted to the factory. I mean, this is an extra hassle. So this is not something that we want to do. And we also, as much as we can go paperless, and frankly, this COVID has brought in e-commerce to everybody. So I've seen flower vendors literally going through online platforms. So it's a question of just a habit and a conviction and a stress on, making it happen. So I would urge the government to, and through Onir to convey to the government that, it's not only just about having the workers go digital, it's also about showcasing Bangladesh as a separate brand through a virtual marketplace to the world. And there's so many digital opportunities we have at this point. If we don't make use of it at this point, then I don't know when we will. So for us, we would really want the industry to go completely digital. It's just not about buying, not about just getting their salaries. It's about their transfers to their loved ones in villages. It's about their establishing their identities, basically, and it's needed, because we want that transparency. So going forward, we would hope that the digital wallet that we have proposed, and the papers are with Bangladesh Bank. I'm hoping that will come through, because if it does, then we can roll it out amongst all the workers in no time. Thank you.
Brilliant. What a vision. And live lobbying. I love it. We should hold such webinars more often to encourage live lobbying. So Mesbah Bhai, I will not put you on the spot and ask you to respond to Ruban Appa. I'm sure you will need to take time and to consider. But I would like to hear your general, the Bangladesh Bank's approach to engaging all types of players in the ecosystem, and particularly this fascinating introduction of agency banking and the vision for that, and how it synchronizes with MFS.
Okay. Basically, we are the regulators of the market, and the principal role of the regulator is to create an environment when all the participants can engage themselves. So that is the motto that we are having, and we are working on in that area. You know that there are many infrastructure that we have created in the market, and it is for all types of market participants. We have the national payment switch for card payment, we have BFTN, Bangladesh Electronic Fund Transfer Network, and a check processing system for the banks and their agent banking units. And then we have MFS, and we are bringing the MFS into the interoperability, so all of them can share the same platform to do the transaction among themselves. So the infrastructure is there. The choice is the customer's choice. Basically, as Anirbhai said, that customers should choose which channel they want to use. But the participants have the responsibility to bring up the right kind of products for their customers also. So from the central bank, we are neutral to all the participants. We want everybody should engage themselves in this sort of effort. You know that the government salary, the social safety net payment, large portion of it, and the pensioners payment, a large portion of it are going to the bank. And banks are using these channels for disbursing those money. So we are basically neutral in that area. We have created the environment, we have created the regulatory framework. So it's the responsibility of the participants who should bring up the right kind of product for their customers, so that customer will opt for those services from them. So this is the thing, and you know that in the MFS and the agent banking regulations, even they can supplement each other. They can use other services to be the distribution channel, to be the partner in acquiring the services. They can do those things, but these have to come to the participants, not from the central bank side. Because central bank has created that environment, we have the regulations in that area, but it has to be the participants who should develop their appropriate product. Thanks.
Very good. So enabling, not directive, in short. Very, very good. So Maria, I want to draw on your international experience. You've seen these G2P programs across the globe. What are the lessons and the best practices that governments can learn from international experience, and particularly in terms of getting services and payments to rural areas?
Great, thanks, Graham. Yeah, it's been a really fascinating time to watch G2P payments globally. By last count, I think there were close to 1 billion new beneficiaries of G2P programs around the world. And so, and again, like this desire to go digital for all the reasons we know. So we've seen a ton of innovation happening around the world. I'm going to share a range of practices, but just because it's early, framing these as best practices at this point might be a little premature, because we're still actually seeing kind of what happens to them. If we look, there's a few common challenges that we see, and so I'll frame my comments around those. So targeting has been an issue we've heard about on this call. We've seen as an issue, particularly around the new poor. Onboarding and account creation with trying to limit the physical contact has been a big challenge. Cash out and liquidity management comes up over and over. You guys know this well from the research you guys are doing internationally, Graham. Exclusion of women, but also other marginalized groups. Communication, outreach, and awareness, and then lastly, grievance redressal and monitoring. So just a few comments on targeting, because I think that's something that Anirbhai mentioned, and I know has been a major struggle. One of the things we are seeing globally is letting people apply themselves through these systems and using kind of that application to link into both the national ID system as well as the larger social registries and other information assets that the government has. And maybe a mix of having local decision makers identify some people, but checking that against central databases. So a good example of this is Pakistan, what they've done with the SS program. They're able to use the national ID number, not just on its own, but it ties into the SIM registry, it ties into the civil servants employee database and their spouses, it ties into who's left the country, it ties into whether you own a vehicle, it ties into your tax number ID. And so using all that information, they're able to understand when someone applies pretty decently what their socioeconomic status is. However, ID coverage is only 60%, right? And so they've had to think about, how do we not exclude people that don't have an ID? And how do we make this a mix of a centrally targeted system as well as a locally driven one? And so I think there's some really great lessons there. If you look at Colombia, if you look at Brazil, they have a very extensive social registry. And so when people apply, they're able to tap into that information and understand their socioeconomic status deeply. And actually in those processes, they've actually built in the registration for the account into the process. And so it's just one streamlined process versus working across multiple different streams. Bangladesh has great SIM registration, phone ownership. And so Nirpai talked about some of the really exciting work that they're doing with Yale and Berkeley and others. Just one last point on that. I think there's also low-tech strategies that we could think about. I think in Bihar and India with the Jivika groups, there's been a lot of efforts to understand which households should qualify for ration cards and food distribution, but aren't accessing them. And so making sure that that coverage is really there for the programs that the government's put in place. And those are things that, again, the Bangladesh government could work with the extensive local and national NGOs to see who's being left out. On gender, or exclusion generally, I'll talk about gender, but we could also think about, region, ethnic, religious, refugee status. I mean, exclusion is a whole separate conversation in some sense. I think I would, really be looking to understand if women are going to benefit as much as men from the transfers that are being made. And you could look at this in terms of what sectors are being prioritized when looking for informal workers. We should be thinking about whether or not we're tracking beneficiary gender and really just keeping an eye on what's happening on those ratios. Peru did a very interesting thing where it's a household cash transfer, but they've asked that the woman in the household be the designated beneficiary. And so there's some simple kind of design elements like that that may help to bring this in. And Bangladesh has done this historically for education stipends, but may think about applying it here. On the hard to reach piece, I mean, again, Bangladesh is one of the most extensive agent networks in the world. And so I tend to think that they're having an easier time in some other countries out there. The more geospatial data we have to understand, are we getting the coverage of beneficiaries nationally, and are we, do we have agents close to them, the better. So I think part of it's just the information and transparency. I think what India has also done with the post office doing home-based cash transactions and cash outs is also really fascinating, and something that particularly for less mobile populations could be applicable in Bangladesh. In Uganda, they've used kind of payment vans that move around for G2P disbursement to avoid some of the crowding. And in Peru, we've seen that the government's creating credit lines for agent liquidity. And so, again, just different tools that people are using to both expand the network, as well as think through how to make sure that the agents actually have cash on hand, which could be an additional challenge. And then I just want to reiterate the point that Kamal Pai made, that naming financial services, digital financial services, an essential service is so important. And we've seen Bangladesh do that. We've seen Kenya, India, Myanmar, a long list. But I think really recognizing that this is a lifeline, especially for rural people who may have less access to other forms of financial accounts, is just critical during this moment. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's a super rapid world tour. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I really would like to try and get some questions in from people participating. So this next round, I would like you to be a quick fire round, which means you answer as quickly as you humanly can. We're going to look at what lessons should be drawn from Bangladesh. What I'd like from you is one or two key lessons. Anirbai, would you like to start with the key lesson that you would take from digitizing G2P in Bangladesh?
Sure, I'll just talk about two. I think one is the way the incentive structure has been set up. I think Kamal talked about it. I think it's been very helpful in the way we've been able to massively expand the agent network and also use the Union Digital Center. It's not a large network, but it is serving a very key benefit for the citizen. So again, it's a business thing. It's established in a government office, but it's run as a small business hosted in a government office with all the business structure around it. So I think that's an important thing to look at. The second thing is the choice architecture. So when we were looking at the technology design, we really kept the user's needs in mind, tried to make it vendor neutral, tried to make it looking at it from the perspective of the users. So that's another thing I would say that we could look at for other
Perfect. Perfect and succinct. Thank you, Anivay. So Mezaval, same to you. From a central banker's perspective, 2 magic bullets for accelerating the rollout of digital financial services or digital payments.
Yeah, if you want me to say, I will say the mutual cooperation among the participants and the regulators. We are open, innovation should be there, and depending on the situation, we have to come up with the solution. From regulators to regulators should have that capability of, should have the intent to do those things according to the need of the situation.
Very good, very good. And Kamal Bhai, I mean, it never ceases to amaze me the scope, scale, but also the tightness with which you manage that agent network of yours. What is the secret sauce? What is the 1 or 2 key lessons that we should learn from bKash?
Well, I think with a couple of things. One is, this is not a T20 match. It's a long test match. So we should be planning, thinking what's going to happen 2 years from now. Okay. And one important element is that, you know, we might be in terms of total per capita, so in terms of per capita GDP, we may not be one of the top countries in the world, but we're a very large country. So when you are talking about a large country, the technology infrastructure also needs to be very robust in terms of basically, you know, the machine doesn't understand whether you're doing a $200 transaction or $2 transaction. Okay. Yeah. So you need the same infrastructure to handle $2 transaction as you need $200 transaction for a developed country. So technology investment, looking at the long-term picture. And what the GM PhD from Bangladesh Bank said, I just want to compliment with him a little bit, saying that it's not a sprint, it's a relay race. So you pass the button from one person to another person. So having alignment among all the stakeholders, and it's a kind of situation where it's relatively clear who can do how much, what is his cost structure. So there is no real secret here. It's a relatively known phenomena. So if parties can align themselves well, then the proper value addition could be done. I mean, we should not be doing things just for the sake of doing it. Okay, where we can really add value, if we can align that, then we can each specialized in our subject, and collectively we can create a very good result.
Thank you, Kamal Bhai. And Maria, same to you. 2 key learnings from Bangladesh's digital journey.
Yeah. So I think the first point would really be like hyper focusing on what unbanked people want and need. And, you know, I think that designing for the future phone, focusing on the agent network, there's just been so many decisions in the evolution of mobile money in Bangladesh that I think the world should be learning from. And so really want to stress that, you know, building for remittances for people, you know, it gives you something you can build on, but it creates a really compelling and important use case from day one. And then the second one, and I think that this is really unique, and you've heard it actually from every single panelist, is the need to collaborate, but collaborate to build healthy competition, right? And so knowing that, you know, part of healthy competition is making sure the rules are right, making sure that the public infrastructure, like the ID system and the payment systems, support that competition. I think that's a really incredible attitude, not just for the regulator to have, but to be shared across the entire ecosystem. And so that the competitive spirit coming out with also a lot of appreciation for where cooperation and public goods are needed. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I've really enjoyed the fact that collaboration has been a recurring theme, and it sounds to me as if COVID has sort of accelerated and deepened that collaboration, which is a great response to a crisis. And as I say, typical of the resilience and nature of Bangladesh. Anyway, first of all, thank you so much for co-hosting this webinar with us. We really appreciate A2I working with us on this. And I wondered whether you would like to conclude with some parting thoughts and before we wrap up and move to questions for the audience.
Thank you, Graham. It's been a pleasure and an honor to co-host this and co-organize this with you. Parting thoughts, I think a lot of them have been said, so I'll just maybe summarize a couple of the very important ones. I think, again, the choice of the beneficiary, I think, is important. So again, we need to look at not just from a G2P lens. I think it's really a digital financial services lens. So what does that really mean? So G2P is just a foundation. It's given us a foundation. As I said, that we started looking at P2G first, then moved to G2P, and then went in parallel. So we're now doing both P2G and G2P. There are several platforms, but again, based on the same foundation. So Ruban Appa said one thing, that the digital lifestyle. So we need to move people to the digital lifestyle. So they may get a G2P payment, and in most cases they will cash out, and then that's the end of digitization, right? So that they get cash in hand, and then that's it. So they cash out. But that's not where the value of digitization really brings. The value of digitization is in actually providing more complex products so that they can actually do a digital savings component. Perhaps G2P will have a 10% forced savings. Perhaps they can do a digital credit. So look at what Ektibari Ekti Khamar, the Pulli Sanchoy Bank, the original design of it. I mean, we can now debate whether we have lived up to that expectation, but the idea was that cooperatives will be formed, and they will actually take credit against the cooperative savings. So digital credit is actually an important factor to think about. And in time, potentially digital insurance, I mean, health insurance, that is of urgent need right now. I mean, healthcare cost is rising, out-of-pocket expenses are rising, and COVID is actually changing that dynamic in severe ways. And we are spending from the exchequer quite a bit of money, but again, people's spending will also go up because of various complications. The healthcare system is not responding as well as it should, and you'll find alternatives. So looking at complex products based on the foundation that we have built, that Maria and others have said that these are, Kamal has said, that these are examples for other countries, but I think we need to build on that in Bangladesh. And that brings me to the issue of experimentation. So many of these products will just not happen by large design. They'll have to be experimented in some kind of a sandbox environment, in safety of a small community perhaps, and then scaled up. So A2I is working very closely with Bangladesh Bank. Bangladesh Bank, you know, has set up an innovation office. It's in early stage. A2I has been focusing on a fintech lab, and there is a digital alliance of service providers, innovation alliance. So the combination of, again, collaboration between regulator, private sector, the government agencies, different types of government agencies, I think will work together to develop new products. And a lot of experimentation will have to be allowed by Bangladesh Bank. Mezuhai is here, and he's been a big champion of experimentation. So I'm preaching to the choir, but he has other colleagues that he has to preach to. So for that. And the last thing I'll mention is the collective intelligence for these financial products, G2P specifically. So how do we become better at targeting? How do we do better grievance redressal? How do we reduce the inclusion and exclusion error that we have? We have both types of errors, quite large percentage actually. So how do we reduce that? And that's where we need the centralized and decentralized connected database that we have created. We'll have to become much more intelligent. We'll have to bring in pattern recognition, machine learning, artificial intelligence, because that will give us answers to things that human intelligence is not giving us right now, because we're not able to see the patterns. And we can make much more intelligent decision by bringing those in. So that's the way of the future. Talked about some of that. So that's how I'd like to conclude, that we're looking at many, many exciting possibilities that we could teach the world, and many exciting possibilities that we can learn from the world as well, as we make this journey and as we accelerate this journey. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Anirbai. So let's have three questions from the audience. So I think we're overrunning slightly, for which apologies. The first is around digital capability. Maria talked a little bit about how even more vulnerable, elderly, less literate people are preferring to receive their payments digitally. The questioner is asking, is digital capability essential to realize the full potential of digital financial services in Bangladesh? I wonder whether Maria and Kamal Bhai, perhaps you guys would like to just talk briefly about that.
Well, I mean, I'll make it very brief. I mean, I would say that, and as Anir was pointing it out, given the government's focus on digitalization in last 12 years, tremendous progress took place. And to make it very simple, I'll give an example. Currently the smart NID that we all carry, even when I used to live in the US, I did not have that kind of smart ID as my driving license. So it shows that the more and more sophisticated things are happening. I mean, I saw very recently a cyber crime unit we already had, but their capacity also got enhanced significantly. So these are some of the things that's going to contribute in the digitalization process. But in terms of our own effort from the private sector, we're investing very heavily on compliance, on product development. Some of the product that we talked about even in this forum, I just want to share a press release that Citibank gave today. Is they are in a pilot basis following central bank's approval, is offering digital lending in partnership with bKash. So these things are happening in Bangladesh, and so we are in the we happen to be witnessing that. It's a pure coincidence we're bringing it up in this forum today, but that's exactly what has taken place today. So I think the industry has, if you look at the MFS transaction every day, you will see 50% of the transaction is actually not cash in, cash out. Okay, so there might be small amount of transaction, but people are getting used to with digital transaction, and people are understanding how to do this thing. So, and you cannot expect overnight people to make large ticket transaction digitally, but people are getting used to with small ones. And in my own, as a practitioner, I saw 3 layers of progress from the regulators in terms of the rules and regulation. Is that from license to guidelines to regulation, that itself is an evidence of how it's evolving, something that I mentioned earlier. So I see it's a we have to continue doing our job the way we are doing. In last 1 year, the kind of area that was quite challenging earlier even to think about, it's happening. Namely, bank to MFS integration, MFS to bank integration. So basically, if you're, I'm just breaking it down as an example. If you are if you are somebody away, if you're an underbanked person away from a bank branch, today you can deposit your money to a specific banking product in a bank using an MFS. So these are great progress. Okay, and I think government's vision helped, and as BGMA chief was sharing, is that when there was a very clear direction from the government and the regulator facilitated, then us practitioners who were very eager and keen to serve the market. Okay, and that's what we did. So no matter how difficult it was, middle of COVID. We made sure those 2.5 million accounts were registered and verified. And that's something I want to emphasize, that us having a national ID card and central bank GM is here. I clearly remember his instruction. He was saying, you try NID 100 times, and if you don't find NID, and if somebody comes with an alternative, then that is the next one. But you try NID first, okay? And the most of the account that were registered through the national infrastructure, national NID system. So these are some of the evidence that there are the foresight government had 12 years ago. It's somewhat paid off today, and I think and as practitioner we remain ready with investment of all kind, including some of the best investment across the world. We bring it here to make sure that the service can be delivered at the end. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Kamal. Let me combine that question for Maria with another question that we've had, which is, what do we need to do to encourage microfinance institutions' clients to use digital payments? Or perhaps one should put the onus on the microfinance institutions rather than just their clients. But I think that's tied up with digital capability of their clients. So I wonder what your thoughts were, Maria.
Great, thank you. So on the first question, the simple answer is yes, we need more digital capability. And that should be, I think, a key priority for everyone working on this. I will say, I think part of why those numbers are so high in the surveys that we see is that a lot of people have someone around them that they feel pretty confident will do transactions with them or for them. And so you're also getting some of the proxy piece in there, which I think is part of the learning process, right? And so it's not uncommon that we see that, a student helped their mother go through a few transactions and the mom may learn over time, or a husband and a wife may do it together, even an agent in some cases. And so I think, there's formal training and there's, good evidence, I think, that, teaching people about their accounts leads them to use them more. And then on top of that, there's ongoing support. And so again, if I refer to the work we've done in the garment factories, there's a peer educator on the floor, and she's continuing to help people over multiple pay cycles, right? And so I think it can take 6 months for someone to feel really confident to do transactions on their own. And like Kamal Pai is saying, they're not going to do an $1,000 transaction their first day. They're going to start with smaller ones and build up their own understanding of the system. And then hopefully that will lead them to the bigger ones. So it's a process. On the microfinance side, first I'd just say that I think, there's a lot of MFIs in Bangladesh that have been experimenting on this for a while and trying to figure out how to make it work, both for the clients as well as for the institutions themselves. And I think your point, Graham, that the MFIs have to figure out how to make this work for clients is probably the right way to think about it. I know there's been, there has to be a lot more thought about the incentives for the clients. I think making clients pay fees is probably a difficult selling point for clients. It may be a financial necessity for the MFIs at this point, but I think we have to figure out what is the pain point for clients that we're eliminating for existing clients, or what are the clients who previously we couldn't serve that we can serve better now that we go digital. So not an easy one, but I think there's a lot of expertise and exciting experimentation already happening in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. So Mesut, finally, the final question for you is, and this ties into Kamal's announcement about Citibank, which is, what are the regulatory changes necessary to encourage digital credit offerings in Bangladesh? And I would add a little corollary to that, and to ensure that digital credit doesn't become predatory.
Okay, we are just starting a piloting with Citibank and Bikash regarding the nano credit. We have named it as nano credit, and we have given them the permission for piloting this thing. But initially, the regulatory frameworks for MFS are basically allowing them to receive an payment, and this is basically a payment bank stuff. So credits are not in their portfolio at the initial time. So that is one thing that needs to be rethink. We are having a model that that we are piloting right at this moment of time, that the MFS can join with a bank, and the bank should bear all the credit risk depending on the credit assessment of the MFS providers, that by analyzing their data and other things, the pattern, the behavior, they will do the depending on their data, the bank will do the credit analysis, and then bank will bear the credit risk in their books. Because whenever you are allowing credit, there is a question of bearing the credit risk. Who will bear that credit risk? And it is a bank, because bank is providing the money to the borrower actually. So that is the model we are piloting right at this moment. I have said that, okay, this is a new area. We are experiencing many things. We are not sure which will work and which will not work. But regulators are there. We are always trying to accommodate all the things that is cropping up in the market. And if there is a demand, definitely regulators will think about it. And we are trying to accommodate all these things within the existing regulatory framework. We didn't change anything. So that is the one thing. But we accommodate the whole concept in the existing regulatory framework. And if it works, then we can have this sort of alignment with other MFS providers and the banking industry. And that's how we are planning to integrate these two sectors together. That's the plan.
Super. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists. I really appreciate your time. I actually have, I think, a good 24 questions that people want to ask, but I don't think we all want to be sitting here past midnight in Bangladesh time. Maria has a smart new house to move into. So thank you all so much for your time. Anyabai, once again, it's been a real pleasure working with you on this and so many other things. Would you like to say a final word?
I'm good. Thank you so much for the honor and the pleasure to work with you. I mean, it's been a great, productive webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to everyone who attended, both on Zoom and indeed on YouTube. Thank you very much. Good day, good night, good morning to Maria.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.